I grew up more in a Christian household, you know, so there was always the
Same.
Bible and things like
Yeah,
that, and
same.
different rules and stuff. I don't think I really encountered the meditation until really, I would have to be fair and say aside from just hearing about it. Like, actually, I'd heard about it. Like, when I was going into college, I'd heard about it and stuff, but it was just some Eastern philosophy thing. But
Right.
it didn't become real in my life until we started training. We started doing some martial arts. We were doing some of the spoken word stuff and all of that. That's when I was like, okay, wow, like, this is changing my mind. This is helping me open my mind. And for you, where did it lock in, the meditation? Like, okay, I have these visions, these spiritualities, but how did it get to that point where the rubber met the road? Uh-oh, I think you're frozen.
I think a lot of. Oh,
I think it
okay.
was the
Well, I hope it
connection.
wasn't hope it wasn't a bad freeze with my mouth
No,
open.
no. You can, yeah. I'll probably pick it up. It's okay.
Okay. For me, it was a lot of trial and error. And what I mean by that is, like, you think you know what meditation is, and it was me just copying what I saw in pictures,
Mm-hmm.
what I saw in movies, again, because I didn't have connection to a teacher at that time. My studies were kind of incomplete, and the books, which are so available now, were not
Mm,
as available then. So you
true.
didn't have anybody breaking it down in your language. And by that, I mean plain terms. So they were always
Yeah.
translations of these mystic books, but those were people talking in the terms of their day. So I was still left to the interpretation of the person that was writing it. So my experience was still kind of secondhand. It wasn't my own. Um,
Mm,
what I came to, though, and I always kind of go back to the Buddha, was that he went through the same thing of going through other people's experience and wasn't reaching what he was looking for. So for me, it was the
mm.
same way, where I was trying other methods, listening to other speakers, and trying to grasp at what they were saying and get to that place I felt like I was climbing, and I just kept falling short. Not because their methods weren't useful. They were, because they took me further than I had been before, but they just weren't getting me to that point, to that place that I felt like I was still yearning to reach. And no longer the myth, it was the calling. Like, I felt as though I was still unanswered.
Got you. So
You
yeah,
know,
you
like I haven't picked up the phone for that calling yet.
like the
You
hero's
know.
quest, like that circle, like
Yeah, exactly,
you like
exactly. And
it's like you've started on this path, but
haven't landed
that's
at the
yeah,
source of the voice. You know, like the
yeah.
voice. By that I mean it tells you, yeah, you're here. And
Mm-hmm.
mine was still not yet. Nope, still not there. Nope, this still
Mm-hmm.
not working. So it's like hearing a noise in the background and walking through your house trying to locate that sound so you can make it stop. And it was
Yeah.
exactly that. So I was coming to all these different points where I can tell I was getting closer, but when
Now,
all was said and done, that sound was still there. So I had to keep moving.
so where were you at in around the age of 18 to 21? Was that in Clarksville yet? Or
So I moved there when I was 19. So yeah, but I think when I met you, I was in my mid 20s,
26?
early mid 20s. Yeah,
Yeah,
25,
because I was
26.
like turning
Yeah.
21, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
It
yeah.
was it was a
26.
beautiful time, man, because you had just seen over the ledge a little bit to be able to tell me, somebody like 5 years younger, like, hey man, like, you might want to look into this or that, you know.
Yeah, I remember asking you though, hey, what does your name mean? You know, and
It,
you gave me the meaning of your name. And I'm like, that's pretty deep. What are you doing with that? And the look on
yeah,
your face was like, what
like,
do
I
you mean?
don't
What am I
know.
doing with that? And I'm like, well, your name has purpose, man. Like, what are
Yeah.
you doing with that? I remember that conversation vividly.
Yeah, we had some
Um,
great lunches back then,
we
man.
did,
We
man.
used to
Yeah,
sit
yeah,
down,
yeah.
chop it up over Chinese food, you
Hmm.
know, talking about stuff, man. And
Sitting on the water too. That was always
yeah,
really serene, man. I miss those.
yeah. So it's like, okay, so then around that time you were in Clarksville, and
Hmm.
I know that a lot of us as young black men in the United States, we grew up with seeing Malcolm X, seeing Farrakhan, seeing Dr. Martin Luther King, civil rights movement, all these movies by Spike Lee. I know that you were in a hip hop group at the, before that time as well. How did that consciousness transition from, okay, 5 percenters, Nation of Islam, all of the Black Hebrew Israelites, Zulu Nation. Because I remember
Moors of the Science Temple, all of that, yeah.
This is and one of the things that we built our friendship on was like, yo, man, like you know about that? Because I had a lot of curiosities listening to all this hip hop, and I wasn't from a big city like New York and all that at the time. So I wasn't encountering people who had the answers to my questions about both the books and the hip hop.
Right.
And we kind of converged in this kind of like intersection of all of this stuff. Because I was listening to the personal development. Like I had the Tony Robbins, I had the Deepak Chopra, but it was like, it was like hip hop was over here and then that stuff was over here. And with you, it seemed like that we made that kind of intersection, like, boom, this is all this. So how did that transform for you? You know, coming from being a performer to reading all the books and then getting in more to the meditation.
So my journey started before that. Like hip hop was still early when I was growing up. There were conscious rappers, but they were mostly from the East Coast. Being in the West Coast, I had access to it, but it was more limited because clearly you're going to listen to what's more available to you.
Right.
So I heard them. I preferred them in some instances, just depending on what they were talking about. I also think they were more melodic and it wasn't all West Coast gangster based because where I lived, it was about who's good is the strongest and who's most like NWA because they had just come out like cassette tape era. Yeah. So and I loved it. I love that music. Yeah. But every time I heard something where somebody dropped a gem, it just turned my head to that. And I wanted more of that. So I did, but we would have open discussions like at lunch break in high school about what Malcolm X said, you know, and who was Martin Luther King. And we would have these conversations but we didn't have access. Like, so whoever was leading that discussion was the one that did the most research. And I was glad to be there, but I just didn't have a lot to contribute. And that drove me nuts. It drove me nuts
and that's hard for me to imagine, right? Because you had so much to contribute when I met you.
By the time I met you, but I couldn't combat anything they said. Right. I couldn't validate what they said. All I knew was what it was, Black information, and I needed to know it. And it was history, and it's eat it up. So I didn't know misinformation. I didn't know good information. It was just all the same to me. And where I was thankful to be in that time and place, the fact that I couldn't contribute in that discussion drove me nuts because my whole walk at this time was inner path and, you know, the glow and punching through brick walls and walking it alone. And that's all I had. And they weren't talking about that. So I was like, you know, sitting there with this empty box.
So it's probably a little more political, more social than spiritual.
Yeah, well, so I was kind of like a lone wolf in that aspect of a lot of my friends weren't doing that. They were cool to go along with the times, but they weren't searching where I was searching. So the only real form of social intellect stimulation I was getting was from those conversations.
Got you.
And because I couldn't add to it, I had no choice but to listen. And I was filling up my cup, but it also transformed me for a little bit. And I reached this stage where there was this anger. You know, this awakening to awakening to the anger and misplacing that anger. I wasn't angry like I hate everybody. I was more angry like, how come they never told us this? They're lying to us. They're keeping it from us, and I won't let you suppress that in me anymore. You know, so I wanted to just rebel against the system, which I think is a natural stage.
Yeah, we're seeing some people go through that right now
as adults right now. Yeah,
and we would have hoped that a lot of people would have gotten this, and we tried our best over the last 2 decades to share stuff.
Which is kind of the point I was telling you about earlier, with just bringing enlightenment out of just basic and profound statements, you know, and not just for our people, if you will, but for all people by saying things that are, that are so blatantly obvious that if you pause for a moment, the wisdom is overwhelming. You know, like it's far reaching and it shines on everything, you know, and that's been like an emphasis in my life at this point because of where I was before. And I'm seeing people there now, you know, and I feel like I have something to add to that conversation. So,
So then once you got kind of like out in, well, I guess more into Clarksville, then you started seeing differences in the application of being an artist, because you were a spoken word artist for a while. You were touring, doing different things. I guess you also were trying to come to grips with that superpower and the spiritual